I like looking at old catalogs. Maybe you do too. Here's one you may enjoy. The Allied Radio Corporation is a great company from the glory days of specialized American mail order. Simon Wexler founded Allied Radio in 1921. By 1928, he was selling with catalogs through mail order. Allied distributed radio sets, amateur radio equipment, CB radios, electronic kits, parts, musical instruments, televisions, and consumer audio systems through both retail stores and mail order. They sold assembled components through their house brands, Allied and Alliance, and electronic kits were marketed as night kits. In the 1950s, Allied moved into a 147,000 square foot building at 100 Northwestern in Chicago. This building was the size of a typical Walmart of today. By the 1960s, Allied had 12 retail stores in Chicago, 2 in Minneapolis-St. Paul, 3 in Milwaukee, and 3 in St. Louis. Their main competitors were Radio Shack and Lafayette Radio Electronics. In 1970, the Tandy Corporation, Radio Shack's parent company, purchased Allied Radio. Eventually, Allied Radio was folded into Radio Shack. By the 1960s, Allied sold what every teenager and electronics hobbyist wanted. Their consumer catalogs listed their most popular items, including just about everything that was electronic or technical. Probably their biggest seller in the 1960s was audio equipment. Their stores featured hi-fi audio salons where you could check out all the latest gear. Many of the companies like Altec, Electro Voice, and Harman Kardon are still around, at least in name only. If you really wanted to swing to the sound of 1969, Allied could help you. They sold dozens of audio components of all kinds. A popular type were these ready-to-go stereo systems. Stereo was a new technology for consumers, and it was expensive. Prior to the 1960s, almost all sound systems were monophonic. Monophonic records were still being produced in America as late as 1967, but they had faded out. Everyone wanted stereo. Their mid-price stereo system at the top right sold for $399.95. That's over $3,400 in 2022 dollars. About one-third of their 1968 catalog was taken up with audio equipment. Teenagers with paper routes and limited income usually went for one of these record players for $45 to $70. Audio diehards often built their own systems from scratch, so Allied even sold raw speakers to install in their homemade cabinets. Here are some Utah speakers on the left and an Electro Voice model at the upper right. Utah was a Salt Lake City company founded in 1921. Allied sold Utah speakers under the Utah brand, and Utah also provided some of the night speakers that Allied sold as their house brand. If you wanted to steal music in 1968, this was the way to go. Reel-to-reel tape recorder technology was the state of the art. Decent cassette tape technology was still years away. 8-track equipment was available, but it was never meant for recording, only for playback. Reel-to-reel tape recorders running at 7.5 inches per second could deliver the best audio available at the time. Pre-recorded reel-to-reel tapes were available, but probably the most common usage of these recorders was pirating music off the radio or from borrowed records. Polaroid cameras were very popular in the 1960s. The cameras were expensive though, but the film was even more expensive, $8 per shot in 2022 money. Polaroid brought down the cost of the cameras in the 1960s with the plastic Polaroid swinger camera, followed by this model here, the big swinger, that took larger pictures. The film was still expensive though. It was a classic case of the razor and blade model, where the razor is given away and the blades provide the profit. In order to have something for almost anyone, Allied sold tools. Here are some vintage power drills and circular saws. This was long before the advent of battery-powered tools. They also sold primitive versions of the Dremel Moto tool and the Shop Vac vacuum cleaner. Socket sets were a new thing in most people's toolboxes, and Allied made sure they sold at least one set. The CB radio craze was still a few years away, but Allied was already on the bandwagon. When transistors lowered the price of CB radios in the late 1960s, earlier models were tube-based, CBs took off then. They were much more popular than ham radio because the licensing, technical requirements, and the knowledge required to operate them was almost non-existent. Any fool with $150 could be yelling "breaker, breaker" the night his CB radio arrived in the mail. At the right side is one of Allied's night kits, the Star Roamer shortwave receiver, which you assembled yourself. Listening to shortwave radio was still a popular pastime in the 1960s, when it was still considered somewhat magical to tune into radio stations from the other side of the world. You could operate a shortwave receiver without a license, so Allied sold many, many thousands of these night electronics kits to budding hams. There was a real motivation to put in the work required to do the work and eventually become a full-fledged ham, as that would lift you above the smelly hordes of CB operators. Super 8 film was launched by Eastman Kodak at the 1965 World's Fair. The beauty of Super 8 was that the film came in a cartridge format instead of on a little spool. That allowed for easy loading and 2.5 minutes of filming at the standard speed. This film was an improvement over the older 8mm standard, allowing for more exposed film area and a better picture. However, it looks like a typical system would have cost you over $2,000 in today's money, which was way too much for the number of absolutely crappy movies that were made every Christmas. There weren't very many teenagers in 1968 who didn't want to play the electric guitar. Allied made sure they were taken care of, selling several models of guitars along with some seriously oversized amplifiers. There's even a bass guitar made to look like Beatle Paul McCartney's Hofner 500 bass. I can speak from experience that the quality of these instruments in 1968 was much lower than what is available today, even in cheap guitars. The McCartney rip-off guitar was priced at $169.90, making it nearly $1,500 at today's prices. You have to wonder how anyone afforded anything in the 1960s. The pocket-sized electronic calculator had not yet been invented, so some families had an adding machine that could add and subtract when it came time to balance the checkbook. If you spent enough money, some models could even multiply. A typewriter was to be found in many homes, as letter writing and polished book reports had not yet gone the way of the dodo. It would still be almost 20 years before word processors became commonly available. 21 volumes of the World Encyclopedia, that's not the World Book, helped to fill in the knowledge gaps 30 years before the Internet. The 21 volumes covered 15,000 topics, and the set came with, and I quote, a 10-year membership in the publisher's library consultation service, end quote. I have no idea what this service did for you, but it sounds like a very, very valuable feature. Model trains were still highly desired toys. Every kid wanted an erector set, and advanced model builders could build a Revell visible V8 engine. Almost 60 years later, you can still purchase this wonderful kit. I've included the link below if you're interested. Chemistry sets, biology sets, electronic learning kits for the kids. Learning was big, science was big, spurred on by the space race of the 1960s. Burning your eye out, getting electrocuted, or losing a finger were still considered to be just part of growing up. You would think poor Mom surely had to have her own page in the 1968 Allied catalog, and here it is. Featured for her, an electric hair roller set to make her look good, a blender to help her blend good, a tiny vacuum to clean small things good, a larger vacuum to clean big things good, and a buffer with 8 accessories to keep the floor shining and very, very good. One wonders why Mom would ever need an exercise bicycle and a massager after getting all the exercise using the other thoughtful gifts she was liable to receive from the Allied catalog. Check out the prices on these gigantic color TVs. That 14-inch beauty in the upper left sold for $280. That's almost $2,400 in today's money. If you were fortunate enough to own a 14-inch color TV, it was important that you let everyone around know all about it by mounting the biggest antenna you could get on your roof. This 55-element system with the Deluxe Alliance T45 rotator system was one of the really big ones. According to the ad, it gave you the finest reception from any direction up to 175 miles away from the station. It also attracted lightning at much, much shorter distances. Finally, car radios in the 1960s were usually considered optional equipment. Many people purchased a radio later and spiffed up their car by hanging it from the underside of the dash. They also did the same thing with automotive air conditioners. Teenagers always needed a sound system in their cars for romantic reasons. Allied usually threw in a free speaker when you bought the radio, as speakers were not standard equipment in many cars either. The baby boomers used these radios to help them boom out the next generation. If you wanted to go all out with your car romance, automobile 8-track players were the answer. These played music from an 8-track cassette, which was about the size of a standard brick. You jammed the cassette into the square hole at the front. The sound was notoriously bad, and the 8-track player sounded like someone was loading a pump shotgun when it changed tracks every third song. But at least there were no commercials. Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe. Thank you.